Hello, everyone. If you are watching this on Halloween proper, the day this episode premieres, I want to wish you a very happy Halloween. Because Halloween is the spookiest and the funnest holiday, and the one that does not obligate you to spend with anyone in your family unless you wish to. We chose some fun things for Halloween, and this was kind of my idea to end Halloween with this new episode format I want to try every now and then called Body of Work. And Body of Work is where we talk about one actor and some of the roles they've been in. Probably not all for some of these, especially today. We will not have time to talk about all the roles this person has been in. I'm fairly excited about this. He is one of the most iconic American actors. I'd wager to say he's as good, if not better, than Danny Kaye was back in the day. Um, you probably know him as the voice of, or actually Shaggy. You might know him as Dennis from 13 Ghosts. You might have really focused on one of his cameos, like Brock in She Is All That. You might really love his work in dramatic roles, like his role in Twin Peaks: The Return. Today, we are going to talk about Matthew Lillard, and not just because he's going to be in Five Nights at Freddy's set to release. Actually, the Five Nights at Freddy's movie will release on the 27th, so a few days before this episode. So by then, I'll know if he's any good as Steve slash probably William Afton. Hi, Magnus.
Hello. Indeed, in a way, one could say that this subject for today is quite timely, considering Matthew is about to come back right back into the spotlight with this role.
Yeah. Something that's interesting is that he's actually been in the spotlight for a couple of years now,
Mm.
for a D&D campaign ID he had that is pretty popular now, where everyone's going to die no matter what you do in the episode. So we see it in tabletop games like 10 Candles, where it's purposeful. But it's called Faster Purple Worm Kill Kill, if I can say it, is, I would argue, almost as famous as his film career at this point. He's worked with Matt Mercer in Critical Role. He's releasing a D&D themed whiskey set. He did something for the third edition of Betrayal at the House on Haunted Hill, which is one of my favorite horror board games, where you spend the first half going through the house and collecting things, and spend the second half running from the monsters.
Mm.
Kind of like 13 Ghosts, actually. Um, but
Mm.
it's this interesting thing where Matthew Lillard, for me, is kind of a generational character actor, in a generation where we don't really call them character actors anymore. He does really give me the vibe of that old, very comedic style, which makes sense because he's done
Mm.
Shakespeare. He went to the same college as Paul Rudd went to. So he has a lot of really good bona fides outside of horror, but people always talk about him as just a horror actor when he's so much more than just doing scary movies. Though the scary movies he's been in, a lot of people really love, including me. So
Mm. Indeed. I can see what you mean. Like certain roles he's done with Scream, 13 Ghosts, as you mentioned, and to be fair, Scooby Doo, which is has always been like spooky comedy in its theming. It's easy to see how that can overcome his other roles that when he was in Without a Paddle, um She's All That and such. I think they're more, dare I say, iconic, and that's probably why people lean more towards his horror
yeah.
acting rather than his comedy. But he definitely comes across as someone that can very much handle both sides of the coin.
Yeah, what's really funny is that Movie Web did his best movie roles, quote unquote, his top 15,
Mm.
and none of the movie roles are his horror films. Like, he has more,
Yeah.
they talk more about his cameos and other things than they do about his horror film, almost like they don't take his horror work seriously. But I would argue Scream being one of the first new slashers and the iconic cast that included him, I don't want to discount his dramatic roles, and I think they're really interesting. He does a lot of
Mm.
dramatic work, like The Groomsmen or Finder's Fee. or the one that takes place in the strip club, where they all happen in one room, and it's really heavy character work. It has the very Five Nights
Mm.
at Freddy's vibe to it, actually. He also got his start. His first major role was in one of the best John Waters films. So he does have a camp sensibility to his work, not just because of
Mm.
Scooby Doo, but he started out doing Shakespeare and camp essentially. So yeah, he's not just doing horror because he's doing it. He's kind of doing it the way Vincent Price did it, where he fell into it, and that just is who he is now. But his body of work is large. It does tend toward horror, but that's because I think the way his kind of body moves and the way he screams does make
Mm.
more sense for him to do horror, I suppose.
Yes. Um, it's interesting. He comes across as having this energy that can very easily translate either into sort of over the top comedic roles or can be very intensely focused when he wants it to be. I suppose that kind of gives very much a viewpoint of his versatility as an actor. Um, and something I wanted to mention briefly is not just acting. He's got several side interests as well. You mentioned about D&D. Um, he's got his own company which focuses on licensing additional products to expand things like Magic the Gathering and the D&D franchise and its lore. So
Yeah.
he's not he's very much not a one note sort of person. He's quite talented in a few different areas.
Yeah, he kind of went the same way that Joe Manganiello went and Will
Mm.
Friedle, where they both kind of were circling D&D for a while, and they sort of quote unquote came out as D&D aficionados. He actually does D&D. He approaches it more from the improv tradition, which
Mm.
is what Faster Purple Worm Kill Kill is known for. But
Yes.
Beetle and Grimm, his company, is pretty wide ranging with their Dungeons and Dragons products, which I really appreciate. I kind of want to start this with his
Hmm.
more famous roles that people will kind of know him for and talk about them in regards to what he did in the movie and why we still think about it. So I
Yes.
think because it is spooky time, at least until midnight on when this episode airs, when it becomes All Saints Day and Chernobog has to go back into his Bald Mountain place where he can wait to DJ for another year. I kind of want to talk about Scream first, because Scream is maybe not his most iconic role, but I think it's probably the one that rebooted his career a little bit. Because Scream, if I look at the IMDb page, I'm pretty sure, and I just want to double check this before I say it. Um,
Mm.
I think Scream predates. I'm scrolling. There's so much to scroll on his IMDb page. I promise you, there's so much going on. So he was supposed to be. He was in Scream One. He's uncredited in Scream Two. He was supposed to be in Scream Three, and it didn't happen. But Scream predates Scooby Doo. So the first
Yes.
time most people saw um, him, if they didn't
Mm.
see him in Serial Mom or Hackers, which I want to talk about Serial Mom if we can,
Mm.
they probably saw him as Stu in Scream, alongside Nev Campbell and Drew Barrymore and Monica from Frez. Uh, so basically, Scream was sort of this cultural reset in '96 that grabbed the imaginations of people.
Mm.
The people that weren't in Scream were in the craft. It was a big year for horror and witchiness in the cinema, and for kids of a certain type. People love Scream not just because of the actors, but because of how self-aware it is. They love the twist. I would argue to say we all kind of fell in love with Matthew Lillard because of Scream. I think that the reveal of who the villains were doesn't work without Matthew Lillard. If it had just been the one guy, I don't think it would have been as popular a
Mm.
franchise. It may not have even been a franchise. Stu's reveal and Matthew Lillard going from kind of just absurd eccentric to actual
Mm.
threat is kind of amazing and is probably why Scary Movie riffed on it in when Scary Movie came out that first time.
Yes. No, totally. I completely agree with you. The twist that they're of not just one but two killers, and they're very much in on it together. That was sort of like the whole point which Scream was going for. Um,
Yeah.
they weren't going with your expectations and such. At times, maybe it felt like they wanted to make you believe they're going in that direction. Um, but certainly, like by the end, you can completely see why it captivated people so much. And then Lillard's have I got that right? Matthew Lillard?
I
Am I
say
saying that
Lillard, but I have like four different accents, so I'm not sure if Lillard is correct or not. Because the media can't seem to get off of him being a horror icon, I don't know if I trust the way the media pronounces it either. So just say it how you want to say it. I mean, if he wants to personally correct us and get to know us, then that's just fine. I'll start
Yes.
sending him that wonderful Rosif art of Stu and Billy from the kitchen scene in Scream if he really wants to get to know us.
Well, Matthew, we'll go with Matthew for now, so I don't mispronounce anything. Um, Matthew's phonetic energy in this film is just fantastic, and it goes, as you say, from being sort of like goofy, eccentric to actually all of a sudden having a much more sinister vibe to it. And I think rewatching the film, like he almost takes on a different like view for the to the actual watcher now when you watch him, and then you're just seeing like this like added layer to his interactions and such. Um, it was definitely shocking the first time I watched it, and also the interaction between him and Stu. Stu was the other one, wasn't it?
He was Stu. The other one
Yes.
was Billy.
Billy, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
The interaction between Stu and Billy,
I hope I'm getting those names right. Now I'm nervous, like I have the names of the villain wrong. I know he's Stewart because I'm on his IMDb page.
I think it
I'm
is
just
Billy
double
Lomas.
checking to make sure that Skeet Ulrich, yeah, Skeet Ulrich plays Billy, and Skeet Ulrich was, I think Skeet Ulrich is actually the character that bridges. Like Skeet Ulrich was both in The Craft as the guy that Fairuza Balk
Mm.
kills at the party, Chris Hooker, and he was in Scream. So Skeet Ulrich is kind of the bridge between these two, and it's wild these two movies came out in the same year. It's absolutely wild.
Yes. L- I'm not sure that they wrote it necessarily in this way. Maybe they did, and they admitted it afterwards. But the subtle homoerotic tensions between Billy and Stu make them quite interesting duo to watch, especially when they have this big reveal together and they're sort of egging each other on, and like you can't tell quite like how deep the friendship goes and how where it bleeds into kind of slight mutual obsession with each other. Um,
Yeah.
I think and the issue, part of the issue is like they're only like that for a number of minutes in the film. It it's slightly sad that we didn't get to see more of their sort of crazy duo antics together. Um, and a quick note, I love the fact that in real life the actors have maintained a nice friendship with each other over the years. It's quite pleasant to see.
Yeah, it's great. I'm trying to find the name of the movie that Jennifer Tilly was in, but the
Mm,
idea of the homosexuality, oh, it's Bound, which is the movie she did with Gina Gershon, where they kind of
mm.
play these not quite serial killers. But
Mhm.
Bound is one of the greatest lesbian horror films ever made. It's kind of a non-traditional horror film, but I do think it counts as horror. I like it because it takes on that trope of confronting the idea that horror films are only ever straight people. Because a lot of horror is either coded queer or it's just straight people that could potentially be queer. They pushed the boat out. Scream really did say, "Hey, this is new horror where queer people can be openly villains where they don't have to worry about being murdered just because they're gay. They can be just as psychotic as anyone else. And I like to think it's just a continuation because in Serial Mom, he watches his mom. So in Serial Mom, he has a small role. It's not quite a cameo. He is a cast member, but I like to think he took on the name Stewart after being Chip and after watching his Kathleen Turner as his mom like murder people, kind of off screen, and figuring out the first being the first one to figure out that she's kind of a psychotic killer. I like to think he took that energy, changed his name to Stewart, and moved to the town where Scream takes place and met Billy. And I like to think it's just one big extended slasher universe. And because they rebooted Scream, of course, I'd like to think that reboot includes Serial Mom, so John Waters lives in that universe. I like it. Like in the '90s when they were making horror films, they were so much more cognizant of queerness. And I think Scream is one of those films where you can actually watch it and just appreciate it. You don't have to analyze it. 13 Ghosts is kind of the same way. There's an effortlessness to it. Um, I just think that kitchen scene is so iconic. Just the idea of Skeet Ulrich's Billy like licking his fingers, and then like you've got the fake out about the death with Stewart, and Nev Campbell is just looking on as they're revealing their psychotic plan. But they're still teens because he gets worried about his mom being called or his parents being called. Like that's the line for him. Scream is a great film, kind of about counterculture, and we see that a lot in his work, not just in SLC Punk, which is one of the greatest cult films of our generation. Um, but you do see a lot of that counterculture in Scooby Doo. You see some of that counterculture in Hackers. When he's not doing really cool, when he's not really doing cool stuff stuck in one room somewhere, he's doing some really cool countercultural stuff, and I appreciate the work. Um, Obviously because we're talking about him today. So yeah,
You could almost argue that he's always sort of stuck true to himself as a actor in pursuing what interests him.
yeah.
Um, I've never got the impression from him that he's done many, if any, projects really for the paycheck. Um, I mean, let's look at Scoob. Let's just br very briefly mention Scooby-Doo for 2 seconds. The
Just two
him being the
seconds. I only
voice.
get 2 seconds to
Oh, oh,
talk about the
oh no, 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 no,
2002 masterwork Scooby Doo. Oh
oh, no,
God.
no, 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 no. We'll go full on into that soon. I meaning, I'm just in this referencing. I was just going to say that he's been the voice of Shaggy for donkey's years now. You've got to have some proper dedication to the role to be the voice to someone for that long.
Yeah.
Um, and I truly think it's because he really generally likes being the voice of Shaggy, and anything else he's got involved in a sense, has clearly been passion projects for him. Um, you mentioned before, like he's known for all sort of things. Just having a look at his earlier stuff, like um, you mentioned about serial killers. That was a black comedy. He did one called Animal Room, which was an American thriller drama as
Yeah.
well. And we've mentioned some other ones already. Um, so I think he's just one of those actors that he's never tried to go for celebrity A-list mega stardom. Rather, he likes acting because he likes acting, and he'll do roles that he feels connected to.
But he's really good at it too. I think that's something we
Mm.
forget because we have all these shows now that get like canceled after 2 seasons, so they interrupt our love affair
Mm.
with some of these actors. So like Jenny Ortega is in You, and then she's in Wednesday, and then Wednesday gets cut, so she has to go back to You where she has to
Mm.
find a new project. But we spent years falling in love with Matthew Lillard. Here's a fun fact: Matthew Lillard, after the live action Scooby Doo's, it was only then that he started doing the voice of Scooby. He didn't take over the role of Shaggy until he took over the role of Shaggy in 2009 because before that, Casey Kasem had been um, the voice of Shaggy, although his first credited role um, as an actor is on the Scooby Doo show, but he's just playing a random man. He wasn't playing Shaggy in 1978. And he was born in 1970, so he did that at 8 years old, which is very impressive, according to his IMDb. Yeah, I think there's something really interesting in that even if he had just done Scream, he probably would have been a success because Scream was such an important
Mm.
changing of horror. As much as I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, and I love Jennifer Love Hewitt slash Jennifer Love Pfefferman, and I love Ryan Phillippe showering, and I love Sarah Michelle Gellar playing characters that are not Buffy when she clearly wants to be Buffy. I do think Scream is the better of those two teen slashers. Um, I think it's interesting. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. I love doing it in a tropical setting with Brandy, but I do think Scream is probably one of the best horror movies. No matter how many times I watch it, I'm always surprised by the reveal of Stu and Billy as duo killers. And no matter what the sequels did, and no matter about the reboot,
Mm.
that first Scream, the opening scene with Drew Barrymore, not knowing at the end of the movie who Billy killed and who Stu killed, because they're this weird symbiotic relationship that is so gay, it's gayer than actually having sex. I think Scream is probably one of the best horror movies of all time. Certainly, in my school, they had to ban Ghostface masks because everybody wanted to be Ghostface. I don't think people, because now it's so ubiquitous, I don't think people understand the Halloween of 96, 97, whatever the Halloween was after Scream came out. You couldn't find a ghost face mask. You couldn't find one of those special trick daggers that when you turned it upside down, it had blood in it. Like they were both banned at school and impossible to find at the store because Ghostface just became this ubiquitous thing. There were Budweiser commercials. What's interesting enough about this is that Matthew Lillard and Skeet Ulrich don't get enough credit for that work. It goes to the ghost face mask. But
Mm.
without the reveal, without that scene in the kitchen, without Nev Campbell as the audience and that point of view and the homoeroticism, Scream doesn't work. It just becomes any other weird murder movie. It just becomes, it's not even, without the reveal, it's not even as good as Prom Night 2 Hello Mary Lou, which is an amazing
Mm.
film if you haven't seen it on Shudder. But I argue that reveal is what
Mm.
puts Scream over the top, better than Drew Barrymore being killed in the first act.
Mm. You could almost say that's the foundation itself of the franchise, that
Yeah,
singular point, and everything else just sort of built after that. Because realistically, there is moments in the other films that are great and stand out, but there's just something very special and iconic about the first film. And you could watch it back. Some of the technology is a little dated now, but it has that sort of vintage feel of it. And the more time that passes, the more of a vintage horror classic it becomes. And
I
that wouldn't
do.
have been the
Yeah,
case without
I,
Matthew.
I do think the reboot is very good. I am
Mm.
glad that Nev Campbell made us aware she wasn't getting paid enough. So
Mhm.
though I will miss Sydney Prescott because I think as a final girl especially, Sydney is very
Mm.
special. But there's something about that first Scream film and how not just horror buffs latched onto it, but everybody latched onto it. That is just really cool as a concept. And it kind of makes me wonder by the time we get to 2001, so I want to transition to 13 Ghosts, unless you have
Mm.
anything else to say about Scream.
No, I'm comfortable to
Yeah.
move on.
So I love 13 Ghosts. I am not going to be shy. I heard they were going to make a mini series about each of the 13 ghosts that are trapped in the glass rooms in the basement. I'm not sure I want to know their stories. I kind of like making up in my head. So 13 Ghosts is Tony Shalhoub as, and we're going to start seeing this more in his work as we talk about him. This is where he's more Danny Kaye than Donald O'Connor for me, because Danny Kaye didn't always need a quote unquote soft straight guy to play off of. Donald O'Connor always needed someone. When he was leading man on his own, he couldn't do it. But we start to see in like SLC Punk that Matthew Lillard can hold his own. But then we get to 13 Ghosts, and Matthew Lillard is basically playing the spirit guide, second fiddle to hapless Tony Shalhoub's character. Um, but just the way he resonates with the evil aura of the house gives me this wonderful Vincent Price vibe where he has strength on his own, but he can also play a second fiddle character essentially.
Mm.
Because in 13 Ghosts, Dennis is kind of there to guide us through the world. I can see 13 Ghosts being the reason why he ends up getting betrayal at the House on Haunted Hill 3rd edition at
Mm.
this point. 13 Ghosts is not the best 13 Ghosts is not the best horror movie ever made, but it's up there. And I think in
Mm.
2001, based upon the other horror movies we had at the time, actually 13 Ghosts, even if it's not reinventing the wheel, is a pretty serviceable horror movie. It gives me House on Haunted Hill remake vibes. Like I said,
Mm.
Matthew Lillard is giving me that eccentric Vincent Price vibe, but with like Ghostbusters gadgetry. I love how ominous he is. In a way, 13 Ghosts, because it's about family, is sort of like a horror Shakespeare play. And there is something about the macabre fantasia of all these different people in their glass cages that you
Mm.
can't see unless you're wearing special glasses. If you had the wrong actor, you couldn't sell it for anything, not for love or
Yeah.
money. But with Matthew Lillard, you sell it because he believes in it so ferociously that he sucks everybody else into the world. And I think
Mm.
it's kind of like Casper. If you don't have Christina Ricci and Bill Pullman to really interact with the ghost CGI ghosts, it doesn't work. But you have to have people to suck you into the world, and that's how it works. And it works in
Mm.
13 Ghosts because Matthew Lillard is just full steam ahead.
So one could say almost that not only is he the guide to the hapless characters within that come into the house, but he's also guiding the audience to sort of like feel the world as real, like
Yeah,
it's the way that it's working and such, and the over the top macabre elements and such of it.
yeah. And I think this is why the remake of The Haunting failed with Liam Neeson and Catherine Zeta-Jones, because they were playing good characters, but
Mm.
except for the person who played Nell in the remake, there was no one really sucking us into the world. Owen Wilson gets his head bit off by the fireplace, and that's great. Here, this house has the same problem that the Sabrina the Teenage Witch and the Seinfeld apartment has, in that it doesn't work architecturally. Like the space doesn't make sense. You need characters that go full ham to make you forget that the size of this basement doesn't go with the size of the house from the outside.
Mhm.
You need Matthew Lillard for the moment when the basement turns into a giant moving clock piece. You need Matthew Lillard to be like, yes, this is insane, but this is what it is. It's part of why Cabin in the Woods ending feels tacked on, is because the reveal about Cthulhu and being underneath kind of this giant building full of characters in this cave space doesn't work because people are like, yes, I'm here physically in the world, but no one's really selling it. Not the way
Mm.
that Matthew Lillard is selling it in 13 Ghosts. I think you can tell his. I think you can tell how much joy he does get out of his work,
Yeah.
because he plays these roles that are a physical challenge. And when we talk later about some of his cameo work, there's some of the stuff that he's done that is extraordinary physically, extraordinarily intimate, and takes an extraordinary talent to do. Any
Mm.
movie where people do not leave a building or a room and it's basically a one room play, that's hard to do.
Mm.
And to do it in a way, because the medium of a play is different than the medium of a film, but it's so hard to do. Like 13 Ghosts for me as a concept doesn't work on paper as well as Scream because there's so many moving parts that could go wrong. And you have
Yes.
to have Matthew Lillard as the center of that universe going, yes, believe in this.
Mm.
It's something I wish Ryan Murphy could get a hold of because he has some interesting concepts, but between the follow through and like screwing over people by making them cross picket lines. Ryan Murphy could never do 13 Ghosts. That's all I'm gonna say.
It's a the very essence of 13 Ghosts is quite different to Screen as well. It's a totally different type of horror.
Yeah,
It's a bit more, dare I say, visceral. Yes, in Screen you get people being stabbed here and there and such, but there's always still a bit more of like a straightforward threat in like like the human aspect of the actual killer, notwithstanding like the strange supernatural um resilience the killer has sometimes. Um, Whereas 13 Ghosts, it's more supernatural. It's over the top with the ghosts being disfigured in various ways and such. Um, so yeah, I think that leans more towards it being a bit more otherworldly because of that. So you do need someone in the center still keeping the focus of the audience on the film. And dare I say, if you look at the choice of attire for Matthew in this film, um, it's interesting. It's almost a bit salesman-like, sort of like the jacket and the slightly open shirt. Like it almost feels like they purposely chose something that's casual, yes, but also what you might have expected someone from that era to wear if they were trying to sell you something. I
yeah.
don't know if that's just my interpretation of
No,
the choice of outfit.
I think it works too because a lot of the work that he does,
Mm,
you don't think about it until afterwards, but especially in like Hackers, SLC Punk, She's All That, I would say The Groomsman, especially Scooby Doo, there is sort of a costume that Matthew Lillard does wear as a character to give you a visual idea of who he is. And in a way, in 13 Ghosts, he does have to sell Tony Shalhoub on the existence of the ghosts. Tony Shalhoub is not a believer. Tony Shalhoub doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to deal with the family home that has been willed him, if I remember correctly. He just wants to be a dad and connect with his family. And Dennis kind of goes full fledged tilt into this dark fantasy. I would kind of love to see 13 Ghosts remade if Guillermo del Toro did it. I think that would be
mm.
the only acceptable remake for me, but I would want them to give Matthew Lillard a role. Like, I'm very excited to see Matthew Lillard in the Five Nights universe because I can almost imagine if Steve Ragland isn't William Afton, you could either find a way to be sympathetic or to really hate Steve Ragland, who's the character he's going to play. I do think the heel of that movie is going to be Josh Hutcherson because I do think Josh
Oh,
Hutcherson is.
Josh.
I like Josh, but I think for Five Nights at Freddy's, it's going to come off really well or really badly because unlike Matthew Lillard, who's so intense, Josh Hutcherson always reads as very sweet to me. Um,
Yes.
Even in his fight in Future Man, I didn't really feel the fire from him. As PETA, he doesn't have the same fire, obviously, because he's supposed to be the exact opposite of Liam Hemsworth's character. I do think that if Josh Hutcherson falls flat for whatever reason, it is going to be Matthew Lillard that saves this movie as either the reveal of the villain or the reveal of the son that's trying to kill William Afton. Because those are really the only two options for Steve Ragland to be, unless this is like a completely new universe and take on it. I can't remake
Uh,
it, so
I wouldn't be surprised if this is if this is a new take on it.
yeah.
Um, it's gonna be one of those things where you recognize names, places, and various bits of lore, but I think you need to allow yourself to also slightly switch off at the direction where the plot is going to go, because I think we might get surprised about who makes an appearance in this film.
I think
Um,
it's spiritually supposed to be more like the books than it is the video
mm,
games. They
yes.
people talked online aesthetically about the red eyes in the
Mm,
animatronics, so I think it's going to be much closer to the novels, which I haven't read, but I know especially the younger generation of people that love Five Nights are really into the
mm.
novels. I do think that if Josh Hutcherson falls on his face, the thing that will save this film will be Matthew Lillard. I think you can quote me on that. I feel not to say Josh is a bad actor by any
No, no,
stretch.
no.
So like Matthew Lillard was also in Summer Catch. He had roles in The Devil's Child. He's done a whole bunch of cameo appearances, like in Leverage, and he played kind of a second fiddle character in Love's Labor's Lost. So he can do it.
Mm,
But he's always the most interesting person when he's the person in the room you want to look at. And Josh can't
mm,
compete with that. And that
no,
is
no.
just a fact of how Josh's acting works.
Yes.
And that's nothing bad against Josh.
No, no.
That's just the way that I feel.
Yes. We're going It's definitely a film where you're going to go and see the acting talent, but at the same time, Josh definitely has the role of a little bit of eye candy, shall we say? Whereas Matthew
Well, he's
will
playing
be
dad. He's doing Josh is doing dad energy for this movie. He's got like a kid that he's trying to like keep. He's doing like cute single dad energy for this. So
mm, um if Matthew does do the role that we are expecting, and if this film does take off, I do have a wonder if we might see a bit of a mini Lillard horror revival era, um, of Matthew being in a few different films in this series, if they do go down the route of making it its own film franchise. Um, and we might very well see him get a whole new bunch of horror fans for his role here.
that would be nice. Of course, we are also going to need to talk about his iconic turn as Luke Fromage in It's a Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie. I don't think he got to be in the Muppets Haunted Mansion film, which kind of made me sad.
I
I'm gonna scroll
don't
to see if
remember,
he
no.
was, but I don't think he was.
Don't think he
Um,
was, no.
yeah, it's time to talk about perhaps the most continually famous movie of 2002, at least, if not all of the 2000s. Every couple of months, this movie gets rediscovered in GIF form, especially. It is time to talk about uh, Bickford Schmeckler's Cool Ideas from 2006. No, we're going to talk about this live action Scooby Doo movie that has maybe the most perfect cast, and is the sequel is not very good. I'm outright that it had a really good idea, and I like the take on it. I like the reference to Scooby Doo movies in both of them. But it just for some reason did not have the magic of the first one. Maybe it's because we all wanted to do Spring Break with Sugar Ray at that point because they do have a cameo in the film. Um, there's something in Scooby Doo for everyone. Matthew Lillard had never played Shaggy before this. And so this was his first time. He didn't start doing the Shaggy character in the video games outside of the live action Scooby Doo universe or for any of the animated movies until 2009. So nobody had ever seen him as Scooby Doo before.
Mm,
Um, but nobody had ever seen Freddie Prinze Jr. and Sarah Michelle Gellar and Linda Cardellini as Fred, Daphne, and Velma, respectively.
mm,
Um, I don't think anyone had really big high hopes for this movie, but for some reason, it really connected, like out of the park. Um, and I don't know how much Matthew Lillard was responsible for that, but you really have to have a cast that says, we are doing a live action film and we're really going to go for it. And I feel
mm,
like the four of them really, really went for it, and it really worked.
hmm
Um, the plot of it works. Tony Shalhoub and again the reveal of the villain really work. Even the small moment where Shaggy uses his skill in not just eating, but his skill in like the claw machine game to kind of save the day. I appreciate Matthew Lillard amongst his other cast members in this film very well. So yeah.
mm. So, to be frank, you could almost look at this movie um, as a kind of deconstruction of Scooby-Doo, the original cartoon. Um, the opening of the film with the gang splitting up and going their separate ways due to like internal strife, which was never really something that was a big problem in the original cartoon, but makes complete sense if you view it from an adult perspective. I think this film is also a nod to the adult fans that grew up with the original cartoons back in the day. Um, because it not only deconstructs it, but also adds depth to all of the different characters. Like, you know, Daphne sort of almost railing against her role as the helpless, heroine that gets kidnapped and shows actually, though, she has some fighting skills, that sort of thing. Um, I wonder whether, and you mentioned about the villain and such, and the kind of twist and at the end and such. I wonder whether that is what really connected with people, that it was definitely not what you would have expected going in originally to see live action Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the Scooby-Doo movies concept was not classic Scooby-Doo.
Mm,
So those first two seasons of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? It's just two seasons. First of all,
mm.
it's like 33 episodes that created this massive universe. Um,
Ongoing, yes.
yeah, the Scooby-Doo movies were like one of the weaker offcasts. It was like, oh, here's Sonny and Cher, here's Batman, with Scooby and Shaggy. It was, I think 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo was supposed to be probably the high end art project, and it didn't work because Flim Flam was not just a horrible character, but they underutilized Vincent Price completely. Uh, there's something interesting about this, and that I think my feeling is that they didn't know if it was going to hit, and so they just had fun. I can't imagine a
Mm,
world in which a serious person said, "Hey, we're going to hire Sugar Ray because they're a hot band right now with the kids." And I can't imagine anyone else in the room not thinking, "Oh God, we're just gonna have to have fun with this because we're not gonna make any money at this." But there's so many good quips in the movie about how they change the characters. They don't just keep them as those five static versions of themselves. They all want something more. Um,
yes.
and in a way, even though Shaggy doesn't necessarily want something more, he goes through. Um, they have the joke about Mary Jane and marijuana. They have the marijuana joke
Mm,
throughout the whole film because they can't avoid it. But
yeah.
Isla Fisher comes in her like one of her first roles as Mary Jane, and the idea of Shaggy getting to have a romance now seems antithetical, because except for like fanfic comics pairing him with Fred, you never really think about Shaggy having a romance partner.
Mm,
But just this idea of Shaggy Rogers having this romance, getting to save the day,
mm.
being able to reunite with the people he actually cares for. It's a really strong cast, and they each have something really interesting to do. And
Mm.
I appreciate the movie for what it is. I think it's much stronger in gift form than the movie itself is overall.
Well, it depends what you're going in for, like to see it as. Um, are you going in to see a incredibly well-written narrative of the ages, or are you going to see a live-action Scooby-Doo film that's sort of fun and games and is meant to be embraced in all its beautiful, over-the-top campiness?
Yeah,
I think that's what it is, and it's the sort of film that you can sit back and really enjoy with um, good friends and such.
yeah.
And
The
that's what I
the
want to take it for.
Yeah, the only better real Scooby Doo quote unquote live action update that I love more than Scooby Doo the film, Cartoon Network did the series of Scooby Doo Blair Witch shorts where they took footage from like a Blair Witch like movie, and they
Yes.
implanted all the cartoon versions into it, but they like kept the dialogue and they kept like the mannerisms. Um, it's kind of, you can
Mm,
actually find it on
yeah,
YouTube. Someone
it
took them all and
is.
spliced them all together, and I kind of love that. But the Scooby Doo movie, I can imagine execs going like, "Well, this is gonna maybe succeed for its weekend and then no one's ever going to talk about it again. So we'll make some money and we'll get out. But I do think this changed a little bit because where
Mm.
Josie and the Pussycats, the film, sadly failed to connect, Scooby Doo, for some reason, really did. Even
Mm.
though they're both Hanna-Barbera properties, they're both based on kind of older concepts. They're both kind of rebooting and making social commentary. For some reason, Scooby Doo hit in a way that Josie and the Pussycats didn't. In a way that so they also took Jabberwock, who was kind of the shark equivalent of Scooby Doo, and they
Mm.
did an updated comic a few years back where it was Jabberwock. Yeah, I think no Jabberjaw. It's Jabberjaw. They did
Yeah.
Jabberjaw with Aquaman, and they tried to like upgrade Jabberjaw into like this gritty shark when originally he was like a Three Stooges runoff. Uh,
Mm.
no, for some reason, of all of the Hanna-Barbera properties, and this didn't happen with Scoob, and I'm angry about this because Scoob was started the Wacky Races cinematic universe. I think
Mm.
Scoob was cursed because they didn't have Matthew Lillard voice Shaggy, and Matthew Lillard again has been voicing Shaggy since 2009. Something about Scooby Doo just hit really well. Maybe it was Freddie Prinze Jr. going blonde. I don't know. Um, but there was something where this movie really, even like Lesbian Awakenings about Linda Cardellini, everybody seems to love that. Uh, I think it has to do with why we love the old TRL and old MTV, where it is a time and place. I think the people that really connect with the gifts of it are willing not just to lose themselves, but we have a sort of fondness for this almost innocent now 2000s, late 90s beach party spring break TRL thing that doesn't exist and didn't really exist
Mm.
back then. And I think Scooby Doo kind of taps into something far away. It's not so indecipherable that you can't enjoy it now. I do think there's some stuff in Scooby Doo, like the fart contest, I could do without. Um, but like Daphne almost dying in the haunted mansion on the hill while trying to find clues, I think is kind of amazing. The body
Mm.
switching thing I think is funny. I even think the badly CGI'd villain dog things are kind of hilarious and wonderful. Um,
Mm.
I think Scooby Doo the movie, except for maybe the weird evil islander cultural appropriation thing, which might be problematic. I think Scooby Doo is going to be redeemed the way that I want Batman and Robin to be redeemed. I don't think Batman and Robin is quite there yet, but I think Scooby Doo worked for a reason. I'm not quite sure why it hit, but in
I
2002, for some reason, it just really, people just really loved it and connected with it. And Matthew Lillard could just do no wrong for anybody after that. He was just
mm.
the best Shaggy.
I wonder whether it hit because it tapped into something that we've seen much more in the last bit of these past 2 decades, as opposed to when Scooby-Doo came out in 2000. Was it 2001, 2002? 2002. Um,
2002, yeah.
the thing is, there is a real thing among fans that they do enjoy a bit of tongue in cheek slash knowing nods to things they like. Um, when you become a fan of something for such a long time and such, you start to really appreciate all the different nuances of the franchise that you're a part of. There is a case that some fans will prefer one incarnation of something over the other, but there's certain things that all the Scooby-Doo shows have sort of shared, like key characters, key theming, stuff like that. And in a way, what we've seen is the rise of a number of movies or TV shows that are almost sort of like an in-joke for fans. Um, like they taking like a merry like little laugh at their own franchise or like omitting sort of like the tropes of it. We didn't really see too much of that at the start of the 2000s, but if you look at things now, um, you've had a number of productions that have gone in that direction. So I wonder if like Scooby Doo was slightly ahead of the curve there.
It's possible. I mean, the other thing that might have been, I don't want to call this in its favor, but it is what it
Mm.
is. We were all
Yep.
still shell shocked at the end of 2001. So anything that could be fun and light and celebratory.
Mm.
Alton Brown talks about this in the Hot Ones interview that he did when he talked
Yep.
about why the Food Network became popular. And so, really, there's no other way around it. Is that the kind of depression and comfort we were seeking after 9
Mm.
11 could have easily leaked into 2002 and made the Scooby Doo movie like appointment. It could have made it a joy. It gave you
Mm.
a moment that was a breath away from those things. It is not the heaviest movie, even in Matthew Lillard's body of work. It's certainly not the heaviest movie in Sarah Michelle Gellar's body of work.
Mm.
Um, it could have just been that. Even in 2002, Sugar Ray was already quote unquote kind of over, and so to have them as sort of the spring break band still felt like a throwback even in 2002.
Mm.
They had kind of gone through their heyday already. Scooby Doo was kind of the end of their heyday. Um, at this point, too, Scooby Doo has done a lot just as a franchise. I just want to give you a concept of all the things that not just Matthew Lillard has been in, but Shaggy Rogers.
Mm.
Matthew Lillard's version of Shaggy Rogers has been in, just so people understand the size of this. So uh, there is an upcoming 2023 Scooby Doo and Crypto 2, which is like a Superman thing. In Teen Titans Go, there's an episode where Matthew Lillard is Shaggy Rogers. There's a Scooby Doo and the Mystery Pups, which I think is a Scooby Doo, um, the '86 version where they're all kids. It looks a little bit like that. Uh, the 2 episode stint on Critical Role where he played Agent Goldstein, the serial killer. There is a Trick or Treat Scooby Doo, which is full on horror, which is great. He's been in Robot Chicken as Shaggy. He's done Billions. He did Mortal Kombat Legends. He voiced Shaggy, which is kind of like that meme about Shaggy having all the power. Uh, I think people kind of forget this, but in 2021 they did a reboot of She's All That with He's All That, and he actually came back to the cast and played the principal in He's All That. So he actually came back to one of his earlier roles because in She's All That he had a very small role, and so He's All That's kind of great. He was in Bosch, which is a really underrated one. Scooby Doo, The Sword and the Scoob, which is like a medieval Scooby Doo, which I kind of love. Um, Scooby Doo Return to Zombie Island. People really love the Zombie Island Scooby Doo movies. Scooby Doo and the Curse of the 13th Ghost is one that I have seen and struggle with because I loved Scooby Doo, the 13th Ghosts of Scooby Doo with Vincent Price, but it wasn't a very good version of the series. The clothing never stayed the same color because they didn't pay the animators enough. Um, he was in 2018 the voice of Shaggy Rogers in a Supernatural episode, the episode where they become cartoons and
Mm.
Dean lusts over Daphne and Castiel does not understand why the dog talks. Um, in 2018, he was also Shaggy in Scooby Doo and Batman the Brave and the Bold. We get a lot of Scooby and Shaggy with Batman, especially, which is interesting. Um, Anyone that was a fan of the Twin Peaks reboot, which I actually kind of like more than the first season of Twin Peaks itself because of pacing, he was in 4 episodes of the Twin Peaks reboot, which I think people loved. He was in Halt and Catch Fire, which is my favorite Lee Pace as a hacker show, going back to his time in Hackers. And that's just some of
Mm.
the things that he's
Mm.
been in. Like
Look,
I'm just scrolling now, and I'm not going to list them
yeah.
all because we don't have time.
uh, and I have to admit, just touching on that point quickly, um, I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back now, I do. Now clearly do. Hackers was the first thing I actually saw Matthew in,
Yeah.
um, and this was way before Scream and stuff like that. Um, and actually, this might be a good point to bring up a point that I really did want to bring up in this podcast episode. Um, if you have a look at Matthew's career, the sort of the apex point of his career really was around the year 2000, the few years before that, and the few years after that. Now, that's not to suggest at all that his career has gone nowhere or anything, but in terms of like his movie roles and things like that, that was sort of like when he was everywhere. He was very much a 2000s film star. Because Hackers was 1995, Scream was 1996, 13 Ghosts was 2001, Scooby-Doo was 2002. So it's actually quite funny when you realize that he did all these big roles then, very close together. So Shaggy was, you know, doing
Yeah,
horror.
Shaggy overshadows Dennis a little bit, but I think if they give
Mm,
him some breathing room between the two, because right after
yes.
13 Ghosts, he did Scooby Doo. So if there had been some breathing room between Dennis and Shaggy, I think he'd be easily well known for being Dennis, and maybe is in certain circles.
Mm,
Certainly, when I told people we were doing a Matthew Lillard episode, their first thought, about half of them, was, "Oh, the guy from SLC Punk," which is a movie that people of like the people that love Dogma and Tank Girl and do a bit more of the indie cult stuff from the 90s tend to recognize him more from his role as the star of SLC Punk. And I do think
mm,
SLC Punk is, as far as his non Shakespearean dramatic roles go, probably as good, if not better, than Finders Keeper or The Groomsman. But SLC Punk and Hackers seems to be two of the roles people that don't remember him for Scooby Doo really remember him for these dramatic, niche,
mm.
very of the moment films.
Ooh. So he's going to play William Afton or Purple Guy for
Well, we're
Five
calling
Nights at
him
Freddy's.
Steve Ragland. We don't
Wow.
know that he's William Afton. We're assuming that he's William Afton because
Mm,
he's behind a
mm.
desk. I'm not going to know until I see it. I'm going to go to one of those. So we have one in the
Well,
cities. I'm going to go to one of those AMC. They're called Fork and Dines, and they can
mm.
actually like serve you dinner while you see the movie. And I want to do that because I'm getting too old to just eat popcorn. I have to have like some protein or something. So I want to make it a full like Halloween experience.
Yes, over your fine steak dinner.
Well, no, they don't. They don't serve. It'll be more like pizza. But
Oh, oh, wow.
I'm not rich
Oh,
enough for steak.
pizza.
We're not making any money from this podcast. This is all just us hanging out. So until we
Oh,
start making
pizza.
some,
How themic for 5 nights.
yeah, I think it's themic. If they sold me
Yep.
cupcakes, I'd be happy about that too. So
So what I was going to say was you mentioned about Matthew's more Shakespearean dramatic roles.
yeah,
Oh, I wonder if because William has always given me the feeling that he could be quite serious and dramatic. I wonder if Matthew will bring a touch of Shakespeare to William's role.
I think he could because he's done some traditional stuff. So when I talk about Love's Labor's Lost is a comedy, it's pure comedy. Love's Labor's Lost is not serious Shakespeare at all, but he's done some serious Shakespeare. I would argue his work in The Descendants is pretty serious. Um, I would argue him trying to keep everyone together in The Groomsmen as the wedding falls apart is pretty serious. He was in 2 episodes of The Good Wife, which was all serious and no levity. Um, there's stuff that he's done that feels very much like he's tapping in to his roots in theater. Um, he was also in like Wicker Park in 2004, so he's done bittersweet and he's done romance, and I think it's something that when we think about SLC Punk, that is also a very bitter role because we come into the movie where he is full punk and he's explaining what punk in that time period is to the audience. But by the end of the film, he's become disillusioned with his own lifestyle because he can see where it's not sustainable. He can start to see the red flags. And so, even though there's joy and there's biting, which I think we'll probably also get in Five Nights at Freddy's, the film, there's something very bittersweet and kind of jaded about the roles that he
Mm.
took, especially in the 90s, especially for SLC Punk. The movie that I can't find the title of it, the one where he plays a strip club patron. He's not the main character, but it's basically men going out of the in and out of a strip club bathroom, and the bathroom attendant that they each talk to. I don't think it's a homoerotic movie by any stretch, but it's an interesting thing where Matthew Lillard is one of the few character actors. He's like Michael Shannon or Crispin Glover, where he can hold attention in a one room movie, which is
Mm.
very hard to do because a big part of tension for some people is walking to a space. As much as I love Glass Onion, there's a lot of walking in Glass Onion that creates tension. It takes place on an island, but it feels like it takes place in a variety of rooms. The Menu is one of the few movies I've seen recently that does justice to this one room concept. Anya Taylor Joy, I think it's Ray Fiennes, and no, it's not Ray Fiennes. Maybe it's Ray Fiennes, but it's Anya Taylor Joy, Nicholas Holt, and a cast of supporting characters as Anya Taylor Joy survives this menu of death. I can see Matthew Lillard working in that. I have trouble seeing Nicholas Holt opposite Josh Hutcherson as Steve Raglan, who's totally not William Apton and just happens to work at the creepy pizza location. Um, a side note, if you've never seen it, there's a movie called Willy's Wonderland, which is like a spoof of Five Nights at Freddy's on film. It's like Five Nights
Mm.
at Freddy's spoofs the Banana Splits almost. And Nicolas Cage stars in it, and it's just
Yes.
about this group of animatronics where like people are being fed to them, and it was like a deal with the devil, and it's just absurd and wonderful. Um,
Mm.
I'm kind of hoping for that with
Uh,
Five Nights at Freddy's, but I'm afraid they're not going to lean into the absurd, implausible elements of this pizza parlor where people are dying and somehow it just keeps coming back.
mm. Speaking about little references and things, um, were you aware that there was an official made-for-TV prequel to Scooby-Doo?
I've probably seen it. I couldn't pull the title off the top of my head.
So,
But, like
um,
I've seen most of the versions of Scooby Doo. Some of them are better than others. Let me tell you.
so it's Scooby-Doo, The Mystery Begins. It came out in 2009, about 7 years after the original. I forget when the second movie came out. Um, it stars a whole new young cast playing the kids sort of like when they just started out
Oh yeah,
doing the
this is the
mystery
one
investigating.
where they cast Robbie Amell as Fred, but then they wouldn't dye his hair blonde. Is that one?
Yes,
Yeah, the one
it
where Robbie
is.
Amell is like the least sympathetic Fred in all of existence. Yeah,
I
I remember that. Yeah, I don't think I finished it. It was so terrible.
I I saw it again. I saw pictures for it again before whilst doing research for this episode beforehand, and I really cannot get over him as a black-haired Fred. I'm sorry, he looked like a completely different character, and the fact that that prequel had a sequel, the lake monster thing, a year later, that
Oh
I
yeah.
so technically the live-action Scooby-Doo franchise has four films, not
Well,
two.
what's interesting too is that Scooby Doo live action with Freddie Prinze Jr. and all of them, they didn't try to do an origin story. A part of
Mm,
why Scoob, the CGI one, failed was because they kept trying. They kept assuming the audience. So Batman movies have the same problem, right? They keep
and Spider-Man
trying to
movies.
yeah, they keep trying to reboot the character like people don't know who these characters are. I would rather see a Batman movie that moves on from the concept of him becoming Batman. I know he's Batman. Like
Mm.
the most successful version of Batman currently
Ooh.
are the Batman Arkham Asylum games where you come
Mm.
in playing Batman who is Batman. You don't need the rehash. If anything, the DC Comics television universe where they've made Harley Quinn into an anti-hero, um, the Harley Quinn movie is fantastic. The Birds of Prey film is fantastic. Yeah, when they try to reboot Scooby, they always try to make it something that it isn't. You just have to kind of let it be the moment it is. It's a
Mm.
dystopian universe where they live in a van, and it's fine. Well, it's not fine, but
And this is exactly what I was talking about before, the knowing nod and wink to the fans. Um, Look at Spider-Man. Spider-Verse is perhaps the most significantly interesting thing in recent years that they've done with storytelling. Yes, people love Tom Holland's role as Spidey, and he did envision the character, embolden the character quite well. And there was something great about No Way Home, which again was a nod and a wink to the fans. Uh, what these films have done really well is the fact that they embrace the fandom and they take it in different directions than what fans have really seen before. And this is something that I feel the live action Scooby-Doo was kind of doing because it wasn't at all an origin story. It was almost a different take on the story of these characters and giving them new depth that people hadn't seen before.
yeah.
And that's sort of what we've seen a bit with recently some of the better Spider-Man stuff that's come out. And some of the better Batman stuff.
Yeah, and I am kind of interested in what Matthew Lillard is going to do with Fat Kid Rules the World. The way that he subverted D&D tropes with the
Mm,
Purple Worm series and Beetle and Groom. I'm kind of interested in this Fat Kid Rules the World series because there is a punk element. It has a very almost punk
mm,
meets Scott Pilgrim pop. It does have very heavy elements. The synopsis plot I'm reading does give me very Perks of Being a Wallflower vibe. But that movie was a very important moment in time for a generation in the way Scooby Doo was.
mm,
I bear in mind that Matthew Lillard is 53, so he's not only had these roles, he has a lot of life experience. Actually, in talking about playing D&D with the same group of friends, he talks about these different life phases he's been through. I'm really
mm,
intrigued about Fat Kid Rules the World as this coming of age story about someone who's 50 who's had all these different pieces of iconography, of American iconography, especially. I'm intrigued to see what Fat Kid Rules the World does and what a coming of age story looks like through Matthew Lillard's eyes, because he's never really played a coming of age character. I always meet his character when they've come of their age. Uh,
mm,
Even in Hackers and SLC Punk, he's very fully realized. Even when they reboot Shaggy, he's almost always fully realized as a character when you meet him. Even in Scoob, when he meets Scooby and names him after Scooby Doo Scooby Snacks, which apparently came before the dog, which drives me
mm,
absolutely insane as a fact. Um, I'm really intrigued to see what Fat Kid Rules the World does. It's something that Matthew Lillard I love is that
mm,
I'm still intrigued by his work. He's 53, and there's so few actors of that age that are around that I can say I'm really intrigued by their work still.
mm,
Even Ed Norton, who I absolutely love, I took a break from a little while because there was just nothing I wanted to see him in. He wasn't doing things that struck me as interesting. Lee Pace, who he's worked with on *Halt and Catch Fire*, I'm always very excited by it still. There's something about
mm,
how Matthew Lillard has kind of emerged just via staying power that has
mm,
really made him a very special actor, I think, not just as a character actor. I don't say it lightly when I say I think of him like Danny Kaye, because Danny Kaye, at the height of his power, was an incredible actor. The Secret
mm,
Life of Walter Mitty, especially, was an amazing film, and of course, White Christmas, where he plays second fiddle to Bing Crosby, is an incredible film. But there's something about the connection Matthew Lillard has with American Hollywood that makes me think that Hollywood can't die completely, because there will always be a sort of Matthew Lillard archetype, but there will never be another Matthew Lillard. And
mm.
obviously he's 53, so I'm hoping he'll live forever. But he has, if you've never really sat down to look at his filmography, give it a look sometime. There's a
Mm.
beefy amount of stuff in there that isn't even Scooby Doo. There's some great Scooby Doo stuff, but there's a beefy amount of work in this dude's IMDb page, and that's not counting the stuff that he himself has like written.
Mm.
It's not including Grim and Beetle at all.
I'd argue there's pretty much something for everyone in his filmography.
Yeah.
because like we've touched upon the fact he's done not just horror and comedy, he's also done serious drama. He's done crime thrillers and such. Um, he's done some biographical work as well, from what I can see. So there should be something within what he's done that you can really enjoy, actually.
Even if you
And
only love It's a Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie, that's just something.
can't wait for the crossover between the Muppets and Scooby-Doo.
Uh,
Don't know if it's
I
happened yet, but
would. Oh yeah, he was also in. I had forgot about this. He was also in the Boulay Brothers Halfway to Halloween TV special they did, which was like a variety show with a whole bunch of horror icons, and so he played
ooh,
himself in the Halfway to Halloween TV special. You want to watch that before Halloween proper because having the trailer for Call Michael Manor and the Boulay Brothers season 5 starting on Halloween proper means no one's gonna get on Shutter on Halloween this year. It's gonna break the system just like the Boulays always do. I also have to say, the beefy amount of video games that he has done just in the Scooby Doo universe, where he has voiced Shaggy or some version of Shaggy. There's like
mm,
7 of them. He's been in 7 video games since 2004. That's a lot. That is not a small amount. And
mm,
also the amount of award nominations he has for what he's done. They're not all great. The Nick Kids Choice Award one is especially very sigh-worthy,
how could you say that?
because it's for best fart in a movie, and I kind of hate that. Because like he's also gotten nominated for German Independence Awards, the Audience
Mm,
Award, which I think is actually very special because it means the audience loves what you do. Best feature film, best ensemble, which is really great.
mm,
Narrative spotlight.
mm,
Like I think people being a character actor is not a bad thing. And I think Matthew Lillard proves that being a character actor is something that it's not necessarily what you think when you think of a dramatic
mm,
career, but it's a very special thing to do and to be. And I'm glad for
mm.
Matthew Lillard. So
So we're coming close to time now, so I think maybe we should end with our closing marks on Matthew.
yeah, I've done my closing remark. I don't plan my closing remarks. I just say them off the cuff. So if you want to do your closing remarks and then play us out of the episode, you totally can.
Mm. I think the main thing I feel when I see Matthew is whenever I know that he's going to be in a movie and when he appears in it, it generally excites me and interests me to see him. He's definitely one of those actors that you recognize when they come on and you know what level of talent he's going to bring to a picture. So, and it's rare to get so excited by an actor and know that they're involved in something. And that completely comes back around again to the opening remarks I made about the fact that I feel he's a rare type of actor that really does enjoy what he does and very much commits himself really just to passion projects that he has interest in, be it a silly comedy or a drama or a horror feature or voicing a cartoon man who loves his snacks and loves his dog and gets into mysteries for almost 20 years. Whatever he's doing, he really does it with a lot of charm and talent. And it's just great to see that he's going to be involved in something really interesting with Five Nights. Again, we don't know exactly who he's going to be, but I think that's kind of the just the fact that he's involved in it in a proper role. I mean, that just goes to show like how much interest and excitement he does bring to this project. So yeah, um, it's been fun, really fun to discuss Matthew and his various bits of work. I've myself learned a few extra bits about him that I wasn't necessarily aware of some of the other bits of his work, but that's why discussions like this are just so great. Just find even now we just find out new things and whether people are talking about in the episodes. So
Yes, it is the service we're providing to all. Another service to provide for all is to make sure if you're taking your kids, your friends' kids, or orphans that you hire in order to do this, if you're taking people out for candy, don't forget, check your candy because you never know what you'll find in there. You may find a copy of Das Kapital. You may find a copy of the Backstreet Boys Millennium album, or you may just find the candy you've been looking for. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode of Everything is Great, even Everything is Gay. Even Everything is Great and Gay, even the straight stuff. Hopefully, we'll survive the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Magnus, would you like to play us off?
I don't know any tunes that Matthew's involved in.
Oh, okay. You could just do your normal sign off if you want to do that.
Very well then. I shall say tada. Shall say goodbye to you all, and have a very spooktacular Halloween.
Fabulous. And we'll see you in November.
Yes.